going to try to keep my voice throughout the sermon. For those of you who don't like a long sermon, you can pray on the other side of things. But I promise I cut it down a little bit for my voice, so I'm trying. Most years, as the holiday approaches, rabbis seek out themes that resonate with the times. But there are some years when the sermon finds us, and this is one of those years. A year in which we've witnessed the deadliest attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. Hamas orchestrated the brutal murder of more than 1,200 Israelis and abducted over 250 others. Hezbollah has launched over 8,000 rockets at Israel, and Iran has conducted major ballistic missile attacks against the country. The violence, trauma, and global response to these events have left many of us reeling. As we enter this new year, we cannot ignore that Israel's very existence continues to face existential threats, and the Jewish world is divided on how to respond. There are times when we feel compelled to address these issues directly. And today, as we stand before God and each other, we must confront the questions that are pressing upon us all. For many, Israel represents a deep part of our identity and a promise of safety and sovereignty that has been earned through millennia of hardship. But the world has changed in ways that challenge us to think critically and compassionately about what it means to be a Zionist, what it means to support Israel, and what it means to be responsible global citizens in a world where the reality of Israel's policies, military actions, and internal divisions have grown increasingly complex. As your rabbi, I feel it's important to be transparent with you. I have very strong feelings about Israel. I don't think that surprises you. I am a proud Zionist, and my love for Israel is deeply entwined with my Jewish identity. Yet I've also spent a great deal of time advocating for change within the Israeli government. My love of Israel does not blind me to its flaws, and like many of you, I too have been deeply troubled by some of the policies and actions taken by the government in recent years. I believe Israel's challenges are far more complex than many of us are prepared to acknowledge. And that is why, before we go any further, I ask that for the next several minutes, we agree to set politics aside, to clear away the noise, and open our hearts and minds to a deeper understanding of what it means to be connected to Israel at this moment. The events of this last year have forced us all to wrestle with deep questions of identity, belonging, and justice. Each one of us has been touched by the recent crises in Israel, whether it was through hearing stories of loss and trauma, worrying for relatives who are in Israel, encountering anti-Semitism, worrying about our college students' safety, or engaging in difficult conversations with those we care about. And of course, we cannot forget the deep concern for the hostages that have been taken and still remain in Gaza. For 362 days, I have included a poetic version of a prayer known as Achenu, a prayer for the welfare and release of captives in our services. For some of you, this prayer is especially comforting. It connects us to the generations of Jews who came before us and to the collective suffering that has marked our people's history. It expresses our longing for redemption, our hope for the return of those taken from us. For others, it has raised complex questions. You've asked, how can we recite this prayer while also knowing that others are suffering as well? How is it that we hold two truths in our hearts at the same time? Maimonides teaches us that there is no mitzvah greater than pidyon shivuyim, the redemption of the captives. It is a mitzvah of the utmost importance, deeply embedded in Jewish tradition. The prayer Achenu originated in the 9th century, long before this conflict really had begun as it is today, and has been recited during times of crises throughout Jewish history. Its intention is not to exclude others or diminish the suffering of any person, but it is an expression of our collective pain and a reminder of our sacred obligation to care for our own community. The version of Achenu that we use adds 2 phrases, and this is why I chose it. One of the phrases is a prayer for wisdom for the IDF, that they may secure freedom without loss of life. The other is a prayer for strength and courage for all the sons and daughters of Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar. By including Hagar, who we heard about earlier, we reinsert that figure of Hagar and her son Ishmael into the narrative, acknowledging our shared heritage, which I believe adds an important layer of compassion and empathy for others, while still affirming our duty to care for our community. In spite of this, I know some of you have shared that you don't feel like it is enough. Even though we pray for peace throughout our service, this prayer makes it sound to others like we are only concerned about ourselves. I believe this response sheds light on a deeper unease. In the face of the ongoing conflict and the events of the last year, many of us have found ourselves in a category known as troubled committed, a term first coined by Rabbi Dr. Daniel Hartman in his article, Liberal Zionism and the Troubled Committed. According to Hartman, there are 4 types of Jewish relationships to Israel: the untroubled committed, those who support Israel unconditionally, without grappling with its flaws or the human costs of some of its policies. The untroubled committed, the untroubled uncommitted, those who feel no particular attachment to Israel or its fate. There's the troubled committed, those who love Israel but are deeply troubled by its policies and actions. The troubled uncommitted, those who are alienated from Israel and also feel disconnected or uncomfortable with the challenges it faces. In the years following the Six-Day War, the Yom Kippur War, and the 1982 war in Lebanon, Israelis and North American Jews largely fell together into that troubled, committed category. They were solidly in the Zionist camp, but also recognized that there were problems with the status quo. When I went and moved there in the summer of 1995, I'm not that old, when I first moved there, this was what I experienced. People at the time were unwilling to give up on a peace process. They were committed to creating an Israel that would be guided by the highest Jewish and liberal democratic values. And I remember that there was hope in the air. Nearly 2/3 of Israelis and Palestinians supported a peace agreement. But soon we found that hope turned into fear. And I watched as the optimism of Shalom Achshav turned into Shalom Chaver, while Hamas engaged further with multiple suicide bombings on buses and in crowded spaces. By the time I moved back in 1997, it was a much different feeling than the first time. The hope was scarce. There was mistrust between the Palestinian Authority and Israel, and moderates on both sides were increasingly fearful that the other couldn't be trusted to uphold peace or suppress terrorism. By the time I then moved back to Cincinnati, support for the Oslo peace process in Israel had plummeted to 43.9%. After the consequences of disengagement from Gaza in 2005 had been realized, the majority of Israelis shifted to untroubled, committed. They believed in Israel, but believing that there were no real partners in peace, had given up on it, and they were no longer troubled by that gap between Israel as it was and Israel as it should be. This is what it meant to be in the untroubled, committed camp. During the same time, most North American Jews remained troubled, committed, but a segment was becoming troubled, uncommitted, increasingly letting go of their commitment to Israel. It's as if they said Israel was a really great experiment, but it's time to move on. Consciously or unconsciously, they were increasingly choosing to disengage, becoming disenfranchised and uninterested. Part of this was because many of the liberal North American institutions that Jews were connected with were championing universalism and rejecting nationalism. Israel was now seen and perceived by others as holding privilege and power, distancing it from moral victimhood. Hartman explains that these Jews shifted to the troubled, uncommitted camp because the dissonance between their liberal Jewish values and the reality on the ground in Israel simply grew intolerable. The article I'm talking about was written in 2021, but it frames a lot of what we've witnessed, I believe, over the past year. This past year, we've been pushed to define where we are on this axis, and none of them is without criticism. The troubled uncommitted have been viewed as anti-Semitic or supportive of terrorist organizations. The untroubled committed are accused of genocide and apartheid. The troubled committed are being accused of not really being troubled. And families are having trouble navigating how to bridge the gaps between the generations in their positions. As we sit here today, I imagine that many of us find ourselves in the troubled, committed category. We love Israel. We believe in its right to exist. We support the idea of a safe and secure homeland for the Jewish people. But we also believe that Israel must be a beacon of democratic values, a place where Jews and non-Jews alike can live in peace and equality. We are deeply troubled by the ongoing treatment of Palestinian civilians, the erosion of democratic norms, and a polarization within Israeli society. In the wake of the horrific attack on October 7th, some of us have been moved to express support for Israel in ways we may not have imagined before. At the same time, many have also struggled with the ethical dilemmas posed by Israel's military response, its policies in the West Bank, and its internal divisions that threaten to undermine the very democratic ideals it was founded upon. We are torn between the desire to stand with Israel and the desire to ensure that Israel lives up to the moral and ethical responsibilities that it has as a democratic state. It is easy in moments like this to become despondent or to pull away from engaging with Israel. Many people say, I don't know how to support Israel anymore, or I don't know what it means to be a Zionist. But I believe that this is precisely the moment when we need to step up and not step back. I'm drawn to Hartman's words that the future of Zionism is going to be shaped by the committed. Allow space for the troubled to commit, and you can help write the next chapter of Zionism. It is time for us to actively work to write that chapter, to stand up and demand that Israel's government starts working for the betterment of all its citizens, not just those who are holding the power. But how can we do that? It brings me to this next chapter and how we can shape it. And I believe it is through the World Zionist Congress elections and the work of ARTZA, the Association of Reform Zionists of America. Some of you may remember every 5 years there is an election, and we talk about this each time, but I feel like it is even more important now. The WZC is the legislative body of the Zionist movement, and it holds enormous influence over the policies of the Jewish Agency, including decisions about funding, education, and the direction of the Zionist movement. The reform movement in Israel is underrepresented in the WZC, but ARTZA has the potential to be a strong voice for those of us who believe in a democratic, pluralistic Israel. These elections won't be happening for a few more months, but I promise you I will be telling you all about it. As we head into those elections, I really believe that this is an opportunity to act, to express our love of Israel. Through ARTZA and the WZC, we can advocate for policies that promote religious pluralism, democracy, and the protection of human rights within Israel. We have the chance to ensure that our voice as Reformed Jews is heard and that we can influence the future of Zionism in a way that is just and reflective of our values. It is through this platform that I believe we can continue to shape Israel's future, standing firm in our commitment to Zionism while fighting to make Israel all that we believe it can and should be. May this next year be a better year for all of us, for all Israel, for all who dwell on earth. Ken Hiratza.